Cigarettes.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm not my husband.
That's okay.
He asked me if I could get it ready for him because he's coming in from Shoal. And so he asked me if I could get it ready for him. So
Wonderful.
I'm just the get it ready person.
Well, what a wonderful get ready person you are.
As soon as he comes in, he'll come right on. Okay.
Sounds wonderful.
Okay. Take care. Good luck, you guys.
Thank you. Hi, Rebecca. How are you? Just doing some last minute.
Good, Rob Abraham. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you.
How cold is it over there?
It's actually today was like almost 50, so pretty mild day.
Sounds pretty cold to me.
Yeah, that was good.
Oh boy, I'm in Southern California, and it is definitely a different type of weather for sure. We don't know what snow is and what seasons are. That's for sure.
Okay, I think that we have people on the call. There's 22 participants, so.
Wonderful.
Okay, that's awesome. But that's good to know. I actually have a brother who lives down there. It's also good. Yeah. Okay. Wait a second. I'm just gonna put the just gonna press. Okay, we're just about ready to start. Good evening, and thank you all for joining us today. On behalf of the entire Neshamas team, I'd like to formally invite you to tonight's webinar, a conversation about suicide. This virtual event was organized in response to the many inquiries and comments we've been receiving lately surrounding the topic of suicide and mental health. Although time is short, we hope to cover a wide range of topics and concerns. If you are watching this on Zoom, please feel free to submit questions through the Q&A portal. If we don't have time to address your question during the live event, please email us at events@neshamas.org and we will be glad to reply to you in a timely manner. I just want to make this disclaimer. If something we say makes you feel unsettled or puts you in a state of immediate suicide risk, please seek help immediately. Call a local emergency service like 911 and a close friend or family member. Neshamas is committed to assisting where we can with long-term care and treatment. So I just want to introduce myself. My name is Meir Nu, and I am the director at neshamas.org. Before we begin, I'd also like to introduce you to the mission and the goals at Neshamas and give you an idea of what we do here at this organization. Neshamas is an organization built to help our community with mental health. We see mental health as a topic which is overly stigmatized and not spoken about enough. We hope that through discussing the journey and struggles of suicidality and mental health, we can dispel the negative atmosphere around it. We believe that as a community, our best approach is empowerment through education and connection. To accomplish this, some of the programs that we have are a bi-weekly podcast when we have warriors come on and share their story. You can listen to this by searching for Neshamas wherever you listen to podcasts. And in accordance with our goal to educate, we go to schools and shuls and help train teachers and parents and community members about mental health. This includes the signs of mental illness and the behaviors in ourselves which can cause issues in our children. We also talk about different approaches and how to find the best path to recovery in each specific situation. If you would like to sign up your shul or school, please email us again at events@neshamas.org and we will be glad to reply to you in a timely manner. Additionally, we also help people who reach out to us through our helpline with finding the best mode to recovery, whether that means finding them a doctor or a psychologist who takes their insurance, or a support group, or just somebody who's been in a situation that they're going through now that they'd be able to talk to. You name it. We then check in and we keep contact to make sure that we are on the right track. Human connections are paramount when it comes to mental health. We hope that all the work we do, including this event, will inspire and encourage us all to build or repair the connections we already have and create new ones with the people that need them. About 1 in every 4 people suffer from some sort of mental illness. What that means is that if you texted 4 people today, 1 of them likely suffers from mental illness. If you sat around the dinner table this evening, or will do so on Shabbos, and there's 8 seats, 2 of those people, it's likely that they're suffering from some sort of mental health. Our hope is that by educating ourselves to better understand mental health, we'll be more readily available to those in our life who need connection. And if it may be us who are the ones suffering, that we are able to find those to whom we can connect with to receive support. Before we begin, I just want to say a few thank yous to the people who helped organize this event. Number 1, to Dr. Eli and Chana Rosen, who founded Neshamas and are an active part and guidance in the projects and programs that we offer. And as well to the rest of the Neshamas board. I want to thank my wife, Chaviva, who is an integral part to everything that goes on at Neshamas. I want to thank Mimi Gorelik, and Moshe Chanan, Chaim Gotlazer, and in particular, in regards to this webinar, to Bensi Zirkin. I also want to extend a thank you to Rabbi Simon Jacobson of the Meaningful Life Center, who agreed to come on and address this topic for us, and as well to Rabbi Dr. David Fox from Chai Lifeline, who also will be joining us today, and to Rebecca from the Didi Hirsch Center for mental health. And last but not least, I'd like to thank Rabbi Ingi Mintz and Rabbi Zalman Abraham of the JLI and the Wellness Institute at JLI for all the help that they gave to us in putting this together. On that note, I'd like to pass on the podium to Rabbi Dr. David Fox. Rabbi Dr. David Fox directs the Crisis Intervention, Trauma, and Bereavement Support Services for Chai Lifeline. He's a Rav and a Dayan and a forensic and clinical psychologist in California. He has presented to communities across the globe and works closely with the Crown Heights Project Chai Crisis team, who he trained. A published author, he has written one book, many chapters and articles, and shuvas on all 4 volumes of Shulchan Aruch. He consults frequently regarding the impact of tragedy, including end of life and suicide within the Jewish community. Rabbi Dr. Fox actually tonight will be joining us in just a minute. But until he does come in, let's just see. Okay. Rabbi Fox said that he might be a little bit late, a minute or two. Just bear with us. Okay. Just bear with us any minute now. I hope he's okay. Okay. We're going to wait for just one more minute. If not, then we're going to move on to Rebecca, and Rabbi Fox will address us after Rebecca finishes. Okay. Okay. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next part of this webinar. We're going to start with Rebecca Zeitlin, who will be our first presenter tonight. Rebecca is the Assistant Program Director of the Diddy Hirsch Mental Health Services and Suicide Prevention Center in Culver City, California. The Diddy Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center is a premier crisis center in the country, leaders in suicide prevention in the United States. They are institutional partners with JLI's Wellness Institute and hosted their first in-person youth leader training in Los Angeles. Rebecca is a marriage and family therapist and a licensed suicide intervention skills trainer. In addition to her training expertise, she brings us to her many years of experience in the trenches on the Diddy Hirsch suicide crisis line. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over the mic to Rebecca.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Rebecca Zeitlin. I'm the Assistant Director for Diddy Hirsch's Suicide Prevention Center. I am so thankful to be here with you all to start the end of the year and beginning of 2021 with this knowledge and hopes that we can help you or help anybody in your community who could be at risk of suicide and know what to do and how to help. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can start my presentation. Give me just a few seconds. All right. All right. Do you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Sure, perfect. All right. So as mentioned, my name is Rebecca Zeitlin, and I'm going to start us off by just reminding that with this knowledge and information, there can be hope and there's help. And I want to quickly go over an exercise on what happens and how somebody could be at a place where they think about suicide as an option. And so to start us off, I want to do an exercise to give us a better understanding. So what happens when stress piles up? So let's imagine here's a youth in our community who is in a very positive place in their life, and they have a lot to look forward to. They, are in college. They are exploring different experiences, getting to know different people, spending time with their friends and family. And we're going to talk about what happens when stress piles up. So you'll see beneath this young individual, there's an arrow, and that arrow is pointing to their future. And right now, there's nothing obstructing this individual's goals and dreams. And so they're very clearly looking at what they have to look forward to. But we're going to talk about, as mentioned, what happens when stress piles up. So let's imagine while they're in school where they were doing really well, that they started to not do great in their classes. Their coursework is beginning to becoming too overwhelming, and all of a sudden they're no longer passing those different courses that they're taking. So school has become a large stressor for this individual. And then we're going to talk about a couple months might go by and they're experiencing a level of pressure from their friends, pressure from their family in this way to explain that they need to be doing stuff a certain type of way, whether that be with their religious affiliations, with their social norms, with their friends. They're feeling a lot of pressure from their friends and family. But as you can see, as time goes on, this individual is able to still see through those stressors because they haven't quite piled up to the place where they can't see what's on the other side. But let's imagine with these various different stresses going on in their life, their friendships and their relationships within some of their friends are starting to diminish. We could even talk about what happens in 2020 when social connections is no longer as easily done as it once was because of social distancing. So a lot of their friendships are starting to dwindle. So as you can see, stress is piling up slightly for this individual, and they are having a hard time seeing what past those stressors, but it's not quite obstructing them to the point where they can't see what's on the other side. So they're able to continue. However, things are starting to get pretty overwhelming. And let's imagine that pressure and that support that they receive from their family is no longer as strong. They're receiving a lot of stress and a lot of feelings from their family that are really getting in the way of the support they once had. So with their feeling school grades and with the pressure they receive, the family dynamic has adjusted and changed quite a bit, so that support that they once received from their family is no longer there. And then they experience the loss of a family member. Let's imagine that in the midst of, COVID-19, maybe someone in their life had been diagnosed with COVID-19, or they lost a friend or family. And so that feeling of loss has become a pretty large experience because of all of the other stressors that are going on. So as of right now, with these different stressors, which once was an individual who saw everything clearly in their future, things are starting to pile up to the point where they're starting to question, what and how am I going to get through this? And let's imagine a couple months goes on and they're trying to work through these really difficult times. They're reminding themselves of various different coping skills and strategies that they've once learned. And then they're receiving some bullying from their friends. And the unfortunate reality is bullying can happen now face to face, but it can also happen 24 hours a day because of social media. So let's imagine they're experiencing a sense of bullying on top of all of these different stressors. And not to mention on top of all that, they're really struggling with their identity. Where do I belong? Do I belong in my community? I don't even feel like I can identify as part of this family because I'm no longer getting the support that I once had. So they're struggling with their identity. Where do I fit in? Do I even fit in? And then they realize that after a couple weeks of not sleeping, not really eating, a lot of these symptoms that they're experiencing, they go to a local mental health center and they start talking to somebody, and they've been diagnosed with a mental illness. So as you can see, this once happy young individual who saw everything clearly is now dealing with multiple levels of stressors. And when stress piles up, an individual cannot see what's on the other side. And so this can give us a better understanding of how somebody can get to the point where they consider suicide as an option. Because when this happens, that can lead to a level of hopelessness, helplessness, and feeling intolerably alone, and that there's no way out. And once somebody shares that they're thinking about suicide or they're in an extreme amount of emotional pain, our reaction when we hear that can look something like this. Oh my goodness, what do I say? How do I help this person? I'm scared. I don't want to hurt this person. I don't know what the wrong things are to say. I don't know what to do. And then oftentimes our reaction can be simply by putting a Band-Aid on it. Oh, don't worry. I know things are hard right now, but they'll get better. And really all that is doing is putting a Band-Aid on a larger issue. So it's really what they need is, I want you to imagine sitting in a dark place. And when somebody is in a really difficult time, like that young person that we were going through that exercise with, they are feeling like they're in this dark room. And what they need is for someone to join them in that dark space, sit there with them. Don't turn the light on quite yet, but they need someone to sit and acknowledge their pain. Hey, I noticed you're sitting in this darkness. Tell me what's going on. It must be really difficult to be in this place. It must be really scary to be in this darkness. So they need someone to sit there in that darkness with them, to meet them where they're at and empathize with them. And once they're able to sit and feel heard and feel supported and sit there with them, that individual who's in that pain will be able to turn on the light themselves. And what we're looking for in that darkness is what we call ambivalence, which is simultaneously having the desire to die and the desire to live. And that's where we've coined the word psychic, where it's the individual's in a level of psychological pain. I help facilitate support groups for people who have lived through a suicide attempt. And we hear often that when people have attempted suicide, it's not in fact that they want to die, but it's the pain that they're experiencing that is so overwhelming that the only way to stop that pain is by taking action to suicide. So what do we do if somebody in your life is thinking about suicide, or you're worried or concerned that they are? How do you help that person at risk? The most important thing you want to do is simply ask, And I say simply, and I don't mean it simply because it's obviously very difficult to talk about such a serious topic of suicide, but it is vital and extremely important to talk directly about suicide. And you can ask, and the most important way of asking is by asking directly, are you thinking of suicide? Or are you thinking about killing yourself? Because it's important to talk about it in a direct fashion because it shows that person that you're not afraid and the stigma is not stopping you from talking about something as important as life or death. And it's also showing that person that you're safe and that you're willing to talk about it, and their stigma should not get in the way of having this dialogue. Now I want to quickly transition of what happens and what are those risk factors that can increase somebody's capability to think about suicide. So some behaviors we might see that could tell us that someone's thinking about, or could, excuse me, that someone's at risk of suicide is some behaviors could be that they use substances like drugs or alcohol. Some behaviors might be that they're impulsive or aggressive, have aggressive tendencies, or it could also be that they're experiencing non-suicide self-injury, which is behaviors like cutting. And that doesn't mean that if somebody engages in self-harm, like cutting, that they're thinking about suicide. But oftentimes the underlying behind that is a level of pain. So those behaviors can increase someone's risk to be at risk of suicide. It does not mean that they are in fact thinking about suicide, but it increases their capability. Some characteristics we might see that put someone at higher risk is if they're living with a mental health disorder, if they have any kind of personality disorder traits, if they're impulsive in nature. Some people who have a level of perfectionism could be at increased risk of suicide. Maybe someone with low self-esteem or low self-worth, lack of social support or isolation, and characteristics of hopelessness, helplessness, history of trauma or abuse. And then also some characteristics can also include easy access to lethal means in the sense of thinking about suicide. Then I want to talk about precipitating factors, recent crises, and stressors. Research used to show that what puts someone at highest risk of suicide is someone who lives with a mental health disorder. But research has shifted slightly in the last few years to show that multiple stressors and crises piling up are actually the hugest risk factors of suicide. So that is something we want to think about. Is there a precipitating factor? Is there that straw that broke the camel's back? Is there a recent crisis? Is there something that happened that could mean that they could be at higher risk of suicide? Something like job loss or a relationship ending, any kind of mental health or physical health diagnoses. It really could be anything that the individual experiences as a crisis or a stressor, especially when they start to pile up. And then it's important to talk about family history, prior attempts, and or suicide ideation. So that could mean that there's a family history of mental illness, a family history of suicide, and that is not because suicide runs in the family, but oftentimes when you lose someone to suicide in your family, in your community, it increases your risk and those around that individual as a result of that suicide loss. So it's important for us to talk about suicide to those people who have been affected by a suicide loss or someone in their family who has lived through a suicide attempt or living with a mental health disorder. And then we want to talk about also their personal history. If someone has their own personal suicide attempt, history of suicide ideation, history of mental illness, or any kind of barriers for accessing care, like financial, geographical barriers, those individuals can also be at higher risk of suicide. So, and the higher risk increases their capability to potentially think about suicide as an option. Now we'll transition to talk about what are coined as warning signs of suicide, but we like to reframe it and call it invitations. And the reason is when you hear the word warning, that's usually a signal of danger. And we like to think of it as an invitation. When somebody is showing signs that they could be thinking about suicide, that is them potentially inviting us to talk to them about what's going on. And of course, it's not always as beautiful as a wonderful wedding invitation, but it is a way for them to invite for you to respond to their invitation. And research shows that invitations in some kind of fashion are present at 4 out of 5 suicides. So 80% of the time, there can be some kind of warning sign or invitation that the individual had shown. The challenging part is those can be fleeting. And oftentimes we might not recognize what those invitations were until after the fact. And of course, this isn't to make you feel bad if you have in fact lost someone to suicide, because we understand hindsight is 2020. So some things we might see as an invitation that somebody could be thinking about suicide is their appearance. And the important thing to pay attention to is a change of appearance. Is there changes in how they look? Are they all of a sudden showing up disheveled or out of it, or changing any kind of characteristics in their appearance, whether they're shaving their head, they're no longer doing their hair, those types of things, changes in their appearance. It's important to pay attention to what their baseline once was and any changes to that. Then we might hear some statements that could tell us that this person is inviting us to talk to them about suicide. They might be talking about wanting to die or kill themselves. They might be talking about a feeling of hopelessness or helplessness or having no reasons to live, maybe feeling trapped or alone or an unbearable amount of pain. They might talk about being a burden to others or showing rage or talking about seeking revenge. I'll show them, that pain, the undertones of the pain. Then we might hear or see something about their feelings or their affect. We might see that they're feeling depressed or agitated or anxious. We might see different types of flat affect where you're noticing that they're, not really any kind of emotion. They're just feeling a level of flatness. Then there's some behaviors we might see that could tell us that this person is thinking about suicide. Maybe someone who's acting anxious or agitated, sleeping too little or sleeping too much, maybe looking for ways on how to kill themselves, such as searching online or buying any kind of means to take action on those thoughts. Someone who might be withdrawing or feeling isolated or increasing the use of alcohol or drugs. And of course, there's also someone starts to give away their possessions. Those can all be warning signs or invitations that they're showing us that they could be thinking about suicide. And lastly, we might see writings, drawings, or posts on social media. So we might see different levels of hopelessness or helplessness, and those can be invitations for us to respond, to ask them, tell me what's going on. So now to transition on our risk model on how we want to assess risk and how to handle or support someone who could be at risk of suicide. Before you have a conversation with somebody about thoughts of suicide, it's important to establish rapport. And what rapport really means is building trust in a relationship with somebody so they feel confident and comfortable talking to you about their thoughts of suicide. So we're going to talk about the components of balancing rapport. So you'll see there's different items in red and different items in green. So
way smaller.
We'll quickly start with those items in green. There's listen carefully, express concern and empathy, identify feelings, and take thoughts seriously. Those are the ways that we want to encourage you all when talking to someone who's potentially at risk of suicide. Those are the ways that you can definitely build rapport with that individual. Then there's those items in red, moving away from a painful topic, offering immediate assurance, or minimizing or discounting. Now, those three things are the things we don't want to do. Those will definitely not help build rapport, but they're mentioned because those are often the way of people's automatic response when you hear that somebody's experiencing a level of pain. So it's important to not do what's in red, but I encourage you all, when building rapport with an individual, you want to do those items listed in green. Now I will quickly show a video about the difference between empathy and sympathy and how you can build connection by being empathic.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, woo, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right, that's one of my favorite videos. It's really a great depiction on how to connect with individuals, which can be challenging at times. So now when talking to youth or really anybody, it's important when you're talking to them about suicide to be calm, confident, and sincere, to convey empathy, warmth, and respect, to remain non-judgmental, communicate the observations and concern. Bring to their attention what it is, in fact, that is making you come to them to talk about this. You want to actively listen, explore what those precipitating events were, help identify those feelings. Do not give solutions or answers, and also seek to understand and clarify what their problems are and validate what it is that they're experiencing. Those are the things we will do when we're sitting in that dark place talking to them about their thoughts of suicide. Now to transition over to assessing the risk, it's important to have a very direct conversation about suicide and ask the various questions that are needed to know so that you can help assess the risk level of what's going on. In order to do so, the questions you want to ask is you want to ask very directly, are you thinking about suicide? And you could use some of your observations as a way to transition into asking about suicide. Listen, I'm very concerned. I've noticed that you have been isolating lately and that you haven't quite been yourself. Sometimes when people are acting that way, they could be thinking about suicide. Is that something that you're experiencing? That's a way to ask in a way where you're paying attention to what invitations they're giving and using that as a segue to ask directly about suicide. You want to find out if, in fact, they have a specific plan as to how they would kill themselves. And then if they do, find out if they have any access to means or a timeline on when they would act. We ask on our suicide prevention crisis line a 1 through 5 scale to help measure their intent. On a scale of 1 through 5, how likely are you to act on your thoughts of suicide? Where 1 means not likely and 5 means extremely likely. Now we ask that because it's one thing to have desire, the want to kill yourself, but this helps us measure how likely the individual is to act on their thoughts. So 1 is desire, the other is intent on acting on it. We want to find out what the stressors are in their lives any kind of mental health challenges, if they're feeling any kind of hopelessness or helplessness, what their support looks like. And if in fact you are talking to somebody who could be at risk of suicide, you never want to leave them alone, whether that means that you stay with them until they get passed to another resource, or that they're taken to a local emergency room if it is emergency. We want to make sure that the individual is never alone. And then we want to gather information, because oftentimes the assessment doesn't give us that full picture of what was going on. And we want to get that full story. Was there any kind of recent changes the individual is experiencing, any kind of recent crises, and what does their support system look like? So these information, along with the risk questions that we just went over, will help give us a larger picture of what is going on, to tell us how that person has gotten to the place of suicide and how we can talk to them. And then we want to ensure that we establish some kind of plan for safety. And what that can include is a way of making a plan on this app here. It's called My3 Suicide Safety Plan app. The wonderful part about it is it's on a smartphone, it's free, it's discreet, and it's customizable. So I encourage you all to have this downloaded on your phone, so that if you're ever needing to support someone who could be at risk, you could simply use that as a conversation and show them this app. The reason why it's called My3 is the individual at risk can put their 3 connections here. So you'll see on the picture of the phone with the 3 circles, that would be where someone would edit and upload what the 3 contacts are of individuals who they could reach out to should they be in any kind of crisis. And then you see beneath that shows the Get Help Now, which connects them to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is available 24/7, is confidential and free. And then if they're in any kind of emergency, they can be connected to 911 by simply just pressing that Call 911 button. To the left is an example of what that safety plan could look like. And this, like I mentioned, is editable, because safety plans can be changed and adjusted given what is going on in the current status of that individual. So they can put in what their warning signs are. What are the things that tell them that they could be at an increased risk of thinking about suicide? Is it that they recognize that they start to isolate, or they start to not sleep that much or not eat that much? Those are the signs that they can put in there to remind them when they are in that space that, oh my goodness, this could be that I'm going down that very dark path. What their coping strategies are, they can edit and put in there what they do for coping. Does meditation help? Does listening to music assist, help, and distract them in those moments? And then we want to find out what their distractions are. Oftentimes watching videos or movies or talking to friends can be a helpful distraction. And then what their network look like. That can be people in their community leaders. It can also be, different individuals like friends or therapists. And then what they need to keep themselves safe. So if that means reduction, so taking away any kind of means that they could use to attempt suicide, we would go ahead and make sure that they'd input in there what they need to keep themselves safe. And then we'd want to close by giving different types of resources to remind them that there is help out there. So some community resources that are available, the first is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and that is a national network of over 200 crisis centers that handle calls 24/7 in a confidential and free way. So somebody would simply call 1-800-273-8255, and they would be connected to a crisis line counselor. Oftentimes, people don't feel comfortable picking up and talking on the phone. So if the individual goes to suicidepreventionlifeline.org, there is a way to chat with a crisis counselor through the computer. Then there's the Know the Signs website, which is Suicide is Preventable. And that is a helpful resource for individuals to learn pretty much what I reviewed with you all today. So you can help learn to know the signs of suicide, find the words on how to talk to somebody, and then where to reach out to. So the suicidespreventable.org website really reviews and recaps what we discussed tonight. Then there's the Trevor Project, which is a national crisis line for anyone who identifies as LGBTQ and is youth. So they serve anyone from the ages of 12 to 24. It's available 24/7. And they also have a chat function as well at their website, this trevorproject.org. And then there's Teen Line, which is a peer-to-peer talk line that's available from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And it's teens that are trained to support other teens, because oftentimes we hear that when a teen is in crisis, they don't necessarily want to talk to someone who's older. They'd rather reach out to someone who's like a friend. And so these individuals are what they call Teen Line listeners, who are there, of course, being managed by trained clinicians, but they're available to talk to teens when they're dealing with any kind of crisis, and it could be anything under the sun. So they also have a texting program where you text teen to 839-863. And we understand that teens can be in crisis outside of that 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time hours. So we at Dee Dee Hirsch's Suicide Prevention Center, we handle all of their calls outside of that 6 to 10 p.m. Pacific time, so that those teens can be connected to a trained counselor should they need any kind of support. Thank you so much again for having me. It's a pleasure to speak to you all. I hope you found this information helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you so much for sharing all that information with us. It is all very, very important, and there's a lot of information there. So if anybody wants to review this, and we encourage you to do so, please check back on our website or our YouTube channel. We're going to make this recording available to be able to watch later so you can see the information. Also on our website, we're going to include all the information from the slides that Rebecca shared. We're going to put them up there with the numbers, the app, etc. And we encourage you to make use of them as much as possible. Rebecca, thank you very, very much. Thanks for joining us tonight from the West Coast. Thank you. We're going to move along with the program. We're going to move back to Rabbi Dr. Fox. And although I said this, I'm going to say this again. But just to introduce Rabbi Fox, who's joining us tonight, also from California. Just one second. Rabbi Dr. Fox. Rabbi Dr. Fox directs the Crisis and Intervention, Trauma, and Bereavement Support Services for the Chai Lifeline. He is a Rav and a Dayan, and a forensic and clinical psychologist in California. He has presented to communities across the globe and works closely with the Crown Heights Project Chai Crisis Team, who I know them personally, and they're definitely people to reach out to in case of crisis. Menachem Friedman, Israel Davidson, whom he trained. A published author, he has written one book, many chapters and articles, and shuvas on all 4 volumes of the Shulchan Aruch. He consults frequently regarding the impact of tragedy, including end of life and suicide within the Jewish community. Tonight, Rabbi Dr. Fox is going to be discussing the different thoughts and feelings that we may be processing around the topic of suicide. We'll also provide helpful insights to the roles of parents and community members in relation to suicide and suicide prevention. On that note, I'm going to hand it off to Rabbi Dr. Fox. Thank you so much again for joining us. Dr. Fox.
Thank you very much for including me in this very important discussion, this panel, and it's an honor to present once again to your Kehillah. I do want to mention that I've had the opportunity to hear Rebecca Zeitlin present a few times, and this was an exceptionally rich and important presentation, and I learned a lot from her. And I'm hoping that all of you will access her data. I'm going to address the topic from a different angle. I'm going to be doing some exploration into our own feelings as parents, as adults, and also to look at some guidelines which we'll want to consider in addressing our own children. I want to begin with a machshava, a thought from our Torah, which in a roundabout way is very germane. And that is when Chazal, our sages in the Gemara, wonder why the Parsha of Sota and the Parsha of Nazir are contiguous. And the Gemara tells us, we know this, Rashi quotes this in Chumash, that what we're trying to derive from this Smichas HaParshias is that anyone who would witness this Sota in her degradation and in her death should immediately vow to abstain from substance abuse, from intoxicants. Now, that's the statement in the Gemara, which has led to a lot of confusion. Because if you think about it, the very fact that you're witnessing the repercussions of this person's misconduct, this sota, and you're seeing her in this state of revulsion and death, that's sobering enough. That's enough that I shouldn't have to now adopt any additional sayagim and any additional restrictions on myself to keep me in line. So how is it that our sages tell us that if we see this horrible consequence, that that's our warning sign to be more careful and not to do intoxicating behaviors lest we end up with a similar fate? It's very hard to follow the cause and effect in the words of the sages. And I want very quickly, this is not a drasha, this is a hakdama, this is a stepping stone for my address. I want to tell you what one of my Rosh Hashivas said. This is Hagon Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zichron Livracha. And Rabbi Feinstein said that it's true. If you see a person in the throes of death, that you're not likely to be tempted to go in their direction. But we also have to remember that seeing someone who's gone through with this process and this ordeal, it makes it more real to us. It puts it into our consciousness. It makes it a little bit closer for our own sense that this is doable. And we might get caught up in that stuff also. Now, one of the many, many traumatic repercussions of knowing that there has been a suicide in our community, and this is particularly for friends and peers and classmates, but really for all of us, the very fact that this becomes a reality, we know it's real, we know it happened, we knew the person, and this is what took place. As much shock and as much panic and as much sadness we're likely to react to, whether we're friends or we're parents. But unfortunately, it now makes it a reality. It makes it a little bit more accessible in our own fantasies, our own imaginations, so that when our own children, despite the fact they know what happened, they know how horrible and gruesome it was, the fact they know it happened, so in their own moments of sadness, as Rebecca was describing, in their own moments of despair, their own moments of depression, this now becomes a possibility. This fact that they know someone went through this, did this, attempted to do it, succeeded at doing it, it now makes it more tenable. And as a result, we all, as the pasuk says, "Chai yiten el libo," that all of us who are living, all of us who know about what has gone on when there has been, Rahman al-Islam, what we'll call death by choice or death by impelled distress. What we all want to be doing is stopping, sober, let our own emotions come to the surface, because It's normal to be affected when we hear about tragic death. It's not normal not to be affected by it. And sometimes in our busyness, and sometimes because of our stresses, and sometimes because of other tragedies and trauma, and sometimes because it's just easier not to stop and pay attention. Unfortunately, there are individuals, we can all fall prey to this, that we just want to move on. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about it with our children. We want to stay in that, I'm not going to call it a blissful denial, but a very active decision just not to go down that path. And it's a mistake because it's normal to react to death. It's normal to react emotionally, psychologically, cognitively, even physically to tragedy. And what we need to do as parents, as adults, as teachers, as rabbis, what we need to do first is be mindful that there's a tragedy and it's happened. And someone was suffering and someone was in pain, and this is what took place. And that affects us. So let's be mindful and let's be honest that it's not normal not to have a reaction. It's very, very normal to have reactions. And it's also very important to do something once we can acknowledge the ways in which this is affecting us. Now, what goes on? We hear about tragedy, we hear about loss, we hear about the way it happened. We knew who it was, or we knew about it, we knew someone who knew them. Some of us are going to react in our thinking. Whether we're male, whether we're female, whether we're scholarly or not, but Jewish people, we exercise our intellect. We spend a lot of time there. And we're going to think about it. And our thoughts are going to go in so many different directions. Sometimes it'll be an effort to protect ourselves from this reality. And so we'll look to explain why they did it. So whatever was going on with them, well, that's not relevant to me, so I don't have to worry about my own kids. And some of us will do the blaming piece or the judging piece, which means, well, probably because of this person or that person, this influence, that parent, that we go into all of these thoughts. Some of us become obsessed with that, to think and think so we don't have to feel about what happened. But we can come up with everything from conspiracy theories to interpretations to analytic to distracting ourselves. But we have to be mindful that it hits us explosively, and one way we run with it is in being preoccupied with thoughts about what occurred, or trying to keep preoccupied with other thoughts so that we don't have to let this sink in. And be aware of that. And be very careful not to participate in rumoring and not to participate in gossip, and not to offer your interpretation or your hypothesis about why it happened, whose fault it was. And we address that piece with our children, our own children, that's not helpful to anybody, and we don't know. And we can't offer an interpretation, even if it makes us feel more knowledgeable, it makes us feel safer, because what might have been going on with that person, well, I know it's not affecting me. But that type of thought process is not helpful. And definitely talking with people about our theories about why is not helpful. And I will tell you that in the Lubavitch community across the world, when I've had to consult on suicide among young people, what I hear from the Rabbanim and from the Machanchim in every community is the same thing, that the aftermath tragedy is everybody starts gossiping. This is what they're telling me. This is not my own statement. But that secondary re-traumatization of the family who's in pain and suffering and grieving, as everyone begins talking about it. And so many of the Rabbanim who consulted with us in Project Chayev Chai Lifeline, asking how do we do rumor control, and I tell them that rumor control is damage control. So just in terms of that cognitive impact, be mindful of it, and get a grip on it as parents. And another part of us that's activated when we hear tragic news of suicide, particularly when it was a young person, is we're going to be activated emotionally. And we have to let that happen because it's normal to cry if that's what you're feeling. It's normal to be sad if that's what's going on with you. And for those of you who channel your reactions along a different path, it's not the mood and it's not the sadness, but it's the anxiety and the fear and the worry. Well, that's also an emotional reaction. And give yourself permission to have that reaction. It'll run its course. And if you have a spouse you're close to, or a confidant, or a friend, or a mashpia, talk with them about what you're going through as an adult. Because you're not very good, you're not very helpful in giving support and compassion and guidance for your children until you've been able to process and look at your own emotional reactions. So find someone you can talk it through with, because it's normal to feel something. It's not normal not to feel something. And sometimes what an adult, what a parent who knew of or knew about the person who's no longer alive, sometimes the emotion, interestingly enough, it takes a different trajectory. And instead of sadness and instead of agitation and anxiety, it's actual anger. And that's the emotion that comes to the surface, that they're angry. And why did they do this? And why did this, how what's the history? And we go into this whole, like, this indignation that why should my child have to be exposed to this? And that's a reaction also. But as has already been said, don't go down the blame direction. Don't try to explain that what happened was somebody's fault. And definitely don't get caught in the bear trap of trying to blame the victim who was suffering, who was hurting, who may have had trauma, who may have had additional emotional distress or instability or disorder. But we want to keep away from it. I joke, and it's not funny at the moment, but I joke that I happen to be a Dayan and I happen to be a psychologist. So I'm really the only one who's entitled to be judgmental. Those are my professions, judge and mental. But we want to avoid that in trying to deal with our own emotional upheaval. And sometimes we get affected physically. And we find that we may not be necessarily experiencing a lot of thoughts about what happened, and maybe not attuned to any emotional upheaval inside of ourselves. But in the aftermath of hearing about horrible, horrible loss, people have somatic reactions. And people complain and they call the doctor or they call the crisis line and they say, in other words, since it's happened, I have no appetite. Or since it's happened, all I want to do is sleep. Or I can't sleep. Or I'm eating and excessive eating. Or I have stomach pains, or I have head pains. I'm weak, I have no energy. So it's really quite common, in addition to those thought or cognitive reactions and the affective or emotional reactions, it's also quite common to find that we don't feel good physically because of what we've learned, what we've heard. Let's be mindful of that. And let's also be aware, as God-fearing, observant Jews, for whom our religion, our faith is very important to us, that we as adults, and even we find this among mid to late teenage, that this can hit us existentially, spiritually. People get philosophical. People have kashas. People may be afraid to articulate, but they're still troubled by, like, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with his rachamim, why did he let this happen? Why in our community? And our avodas Hashem, our tefillah, sometimes can proliferate and we become very, very activated, and we're saying more Tehillim, we're mechavan, more nadavening, and that can be beautiful to a point. It can become excessive after a while. And then the opposite bookend. There are people, and good God-fearing Jews, who in the aftermath of trauma like this, they feel a depletion of that spiritual energy. And it happens to us, and it happens to young people as well. So just be mindful that you are supposed to react. You will react. It can be cognitive, it can be emotional, it can be physical, it can be spiritual, it can be behavioral too. You can have behavioral reactions, and you decide you're going to have more to drink, or you find yourself doing a little bit of self-harm yourself, or doing risk-taking. Yes, there are behavioral repercussions to hearing tragic news, but be mindful, give yourself permission to have your reaction. If it's causing you real distress, find a trusted person you can open up to and talk with about it. But give yourself permission to react, because you're supposed to. The Rishalmi has a fascinating statement. We have a term in Chazal, a mavayit b'yisurim, someone who kicks when he's suffering. So the Rishalmi says, Sha'osa atzmo ki'ilu enu margish, that a person who tries to put himself or herself into a mindset that I'm not going to let it bother me, I'm not going to let it affect me. So that's actually called mavayit b'yisurim. Kodesh Baruch Hu understands and wants us to react, not to pretend that it doesn't bother us. So let's not be mavayit. Let's be mindful. Let's entitle ourselves to react, and we should, because it's a tragedy. And if we need to find someone we trust who we can open up to and process it, take that step so that you can then be more attentive to your own children in discussing this with them. And if you need to seek out a skilled helper, a professional, a mental health professional, there's no shame and there's no stigma to that. In Baruch Hashem and Crown Heights alone, there are some very fine clinicians. And in this pandemic, where more and more of us are doing telehealth, you don't even have to turn to someone in your own community. You can find skilled clinicians, and anyone at any time can call. We know about the D.D. Hirsch hotline. Our department, Project High Lifeline International, 855-3, the number 3 crisis, the word crisis, 855-3 crisis, and we're staffed 24/6. And if you need to speak to an interventionist, then give yourself that gift. Now let's move, because our time, each of us, we have a limited allotment of time, and we're going to try to stick to, I'm going to try to stick to mine. Let's talk about equipping ourselves, outfitting ourselves as parents, so we can address this with children. Children at different ages have different levels of maturation, of development. And you can have a discussion with a teenager, and you should, which is not the discussion you're going to have with a preteen or with a younger child. But for tonight's talk, rather than going into a whole array of developmental interventions, let's just talk about the concept of being there for your children. When there's this type of tragedy, suicide, it's hardly ever kept secret. It's out there. It's on the playground if kids are back in school. It's on the streets. It's on the chats. It's on the Instagram. We know this. It's in the texting. It's in the emails. It's in the phone calls. And it's being discussed. And the most wholesome and healthy resource to discuss this with a child is not another child. Ideally, it's a caring, loving parent. And if you have that, if you're blessed with having cultivated that type of caring, loving relationship with your children, that they know they can open up to you and that you're receptive. So use the relationship for that. If you haven't cultivated that closeness with your children, so get some guidance on how to do that, because you are their best resource, assuming they live in your house and they see you day in and day out. And it's natural for kids to want to turn to talk. And if they don't preemptively turn to you, then you make the overture. You don't participate in the denial as if Ki'ilo eino margish, quoting that Rishami again, as if it didn't happen. And as Rebecca said very, very correctly, in my opinion, we do need to address this with our children. And we don't sugarcoat. We don't gift wrap and avoid words like death. We don't not talk about it as suicide if that has been verified. We want to give the children that pischon peh to ask their questions. And if we can answer them, we give them short answers. We don't go into lengthy exposés and discourses, which will lose them. When they ask why questions, why did they do it? Why did it happen? We tell them we don't have answers to that. Most of the questions and aftermath of trauma that start with why, we keep away from. If there's a real pressing spiritual crisis of faith, and they're really a mature person asking the existential, the theological why, if you can engage in a discussion that's respectful of their thoughts and feelings, if you have that gift that you can engage in that and do that. And if you can't, you don't have the ideas or a comfort level, or you don't have the answers, if there are answers. So the next best gift you can give them is to say, I don't know. And those are profound questions, and those are troubling questions, and they deserve a discussion with someone who can address them with you. And you'll direct them to someone, a spiritual mentor or guide, or a favorite Rebbe or teacher or Rebbitzin. But be aware that young people are going to ask the why questions at times, the older they get. And we can't slam the door on their bewilderment, on their conflict, on their own percolating crisis, because they don't know what to do with this. They don't know what to think. They don't know what to feel. They just know it's horrible. But don't slam the door on their being able to open up. And as we said, preempt. Make the overture. Don't imply that you know exactly what they're going through until they begin talking about what they're going through. Don't be presumptuous. When the child says, I'm scared, yeah, I know, don't be scared. One of the worst things to say, there's plenty of worse things. As Rebecca said, one of the worst we say is at least. Any response that begins, well, at least this, at least that, that's one of the worst. One of the other worst things is when you tell the child you shouldn't think what you're thinking, or you shouldn't be feeling what you're feeling. Giving him the sense that there's a wrong way to react is not going to do it. It's going to slam the door on any rapport that you might be able to offer them. So listen, and listen tenderly, and listen with that empathic comprehension, which means it's their experience and you care about their experience. You're not minimizing it, you're not classifying it, you're not diagnosing it, you're not trying to put it into your own pigeonhole, but you're hearing it as their experience. And you're doing, as Rebecca said, the validating, the reflecting back to them. If a child says, I can't stop crying, as soon as I heard it, I can't stop crying. Now, a parent's reflex whenever our child cries is to cuddle and say, there, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, which is usually not the right thing to say. The right thing to say is, yeah, you're crying, and this is very, very sad. And when we're sad, we cry. So validate that if this is the way they're handling their feelings and they're sharing that with you, there's no better way, no right or more correct way for them to respond. And let them know that you're sensitive to it. You're not going to try to talk them out of it. And you're going to listen with compassion. Now, a lot of the reactions, just a drop of neuroscience, which is what we train our interventionists in, a lot of the reactions when we're facing something traumatic, which means we haven't had to deal with this before, that they're taking place in parts of the brain that don't have vocabulary. And what we're trying to do with our youngsters is to help them find the voice and the words to start expressing the hurt, the sadness, the pain, the rage, the confusion, the frustration, the fright, whatever they're going through. But those reactions, if they are traumatic reactions, and secondary traumatization, which is a term that's sometimes used for the trauma that affects a person who's had a bigger trauma. So it does lodge itself in parts of the brain which have a real difficult time finding words. The way we're going to set the stage so our children can find the voice and discover the words they need to start looking at their reactions is when we give them that empathy, when we provide a warm climate to talk with them, when they see that we're open and receptive to virtually anything that they're going to share with us, that we can take it and we don't steal the show. And stealing the show means that we dramatize our own reactions when they start sharing their reactions, which is the most rapid way to shut them down. So now thinking back to where I started this evening about the importance of processing your own grief, your own sadness, your own fright, one of the reasons we process it is for ourselves, so we can start reorganizing what's going on inside of us so that we can function. But one of the reasons we also have to pre-process for ourselves is because if we don't, we're going to get triggered when our children talk about their reactions, and we're going to lose it. And what we're going to do is occupy the stage. We're going to be crying more than they are. We're going to be sobbing uncontrollably, whatever we're going to do. And that's not what your child needs, because you're the parent and your child needs to see that you're strong enough and stable enough to deal with their reactions. If they're frightened by the way you're responding to them, they're going to be frightened by their own feelings. And that incubates. And then I don't want to go tonight into where that's going to lead them, but it's not to healthy places. So again, receptive and tender and stable and controlled. And yes, let them see that you're moved emotionally by what they're sharing and that you also are reacting. But your goal with your child as you help them talk and find the voice and discover words of self-expression, your goal is to keep them talking. Now, a couple more things, then we have a third speaker. What is the role of reassurance? Okay, so let me run through a couple of things. Firstly, don't promise anything that you can't guarantee. Don't make lofty statements about how you know exactly what's going to happen. You don't. If a child says to you, a 10-year-old says to you, well, how do I know one of my other friends won't do this? So you don't say, well, it'll never happen again. A younger child, you will say it's not going to happen. It's over and it's done. You let them know it's not contagious in the medical sense. You let them know that it was a rare and unusual and the person was in great crisis that we don't know about. But older kids, teenagers for sure, we don't tell them it's never going to happen again, even though we'd like to insulate them and protect our community. You do give a youngster reassurance that the emotions that he or she is experiencing right now are normal. It's a healthy reaction. It's a painful reaction, but it's a sign of their own wellness, hopefully, unless we know that our child suffers from a bipolar disorder or our child has another condition and that the reactions are really pathological. But we'll give the child the reassurance that this is what happens inside the heart and the soul. And we also give them this type of reassurance that they'll notice as the days pass that their reactions will shift. And what they're feeling today will be different than what they're feeling in a few days. And the thoughts that are plaguing them right now will probably morph into a different direction. So you give them that subtle reassurance that this is a reaction and that this will shift with the passage of time. But you also let them know that if at any point they're feeling an intensifying of their pain or their sadness or their worry, we're going to keep this dialogue. And if we have to look at additional resources to give you support during this time, we'll do that too. But we do a little normalizing. We do some reassurance that there is going to be a process. Bottom line, there's so much more to say, and there's so little time. But love your kids and show them more love, especially after this tragedy. And if you have strained relationship with your kids, work on that. But you want to give them the literal hug. You want to give them the symbolic, figurative hug. You want to draw close as a family. You don't want to further fragment after times like this. You want to be there for them. You want to be a stable support for them. You want to be a resource for finding additional support when they need it. But talk to your children. Give them time. Don't make it a rush job. Open up a dialogue. Kodesh Baruch Hu should give you and give the entire Kehillah in the Jewish world the chizuk that we're trying to find after this tragedy. Be there for one another, and let's take this to heart and do all that we can to make our community a safer one for our kids.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Fox, for those very moving words. I think you demonstrated very, very well that this is a matter which affects each and every one of us personally, whether we admit it to ourselves or not. We may be coming here as parents, we may be coming here as concerned family members, concerned friends, community members. However, we have to remember about ourselves and the own internal experience that we go through and how it affects us, and recognize that it is important for us to recognize that if we want to be there as a support. I thank you very, very much. Once again, this information is going to be made available after this webinar so that anybody can go and review it. And I encourage everybody to do so because it was a little, or was a lot, encapsulated in a little amount of time. Without further ado, time is running short. We might go over the 9:30 time period. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Rabbi Simon Jacobson, to speak about the value of life from a Jewish and Torah perspective, and emphasize the importance and speak about the importance of our mission here on this world. Rabbi Simon Jacobson is a pioneering speaker, an educator, and mentor to thousands. He is the dean and founder of the Meaningful Life Center, coined the spiritual Starbucks by the New York Times, which bridges the secular and the spiritual. He is the author of the best-selling book Towards a Meaningful Life, which has sold over 400,000 copies and has been translated into 13 languages. With his keen insight into the human condition and over 40 years of experience, he has the unique ability to offer clarity and direction, especially in difficult times. Since the pandemic crisis has disrupted our lives, Rabbi Jacobson and the Meaningful Life Center have been lauded for creating nonstop programming, nourishing people's hearts and souls. But most importantly, Rabbi Simon Jacobson is a member of our community and feels just like we do. And with that, I'd like to invite Rabbi Jacobson to share some thoughts. Thank you very much, Rabbi Jacobson. I'm going to unmute you. You got to unmute yourself. Yeah. Beautiful.
Thank you very much for inviting me into this critical, important discussion. I want to commend my co-panelists for really powerful and insightful and empowering presentations. I want to begin where Rabbi Dr. Fox left off. He mentioned, "V'achayit alibe," and the living shall take to heart. Above all, I just want to share my own personal feeling, which I'm sure we all relate to, and that is that when tragedy strikes, whatever form it takes, but especially in this gruesome way, a suicide, it shakes us all up to the core. It's beyond our understanding and our comprehension. And as Rabbi Fox said, that's perfectly fine. There's a mystery to life and death that we will never understand. But we take solace in the fact, as one chassid who had a terrible tragedy came to his Rebbe crying about the tragedy, and the Rebbe said to him, his Rebbe said to him, "I don't have answers for you, but I can cry with you." And that itself is the best answer of all, because it means there's some power that we give each other. And the Jewish people particularly, our history is filled with trauma. You go back literally from the time of Adam and Eve, thousands of years, trauma after trauma, personal, collective, genocides, slavery, literally every form of destruction we've experienced. So if anybody has learned, I don't want to call it the art, but the method of looking at the abyss, looking at the darkness, and not being destroyed by it, but getting stronger, as the pasuk, the verse says, Keshayana Esam, in the first trauma of all, in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, it says, Keshayana Esam, as they were afflicted, the Jewish people, and they were oppressed, Ken Yirba v'chen Yifritz. In direct proportion to their affliction, they thrived and they flourished. So there's much to be learned. What do the Jewish people know? Again, collectively and individually. So I want to share a few thoughts on that matter. And frankly, the entire world can learn from this, every individual, because it's time tested and it's essentially a divine blueprint. So maybe the first incident of suicide discussed in the Torah is actually when the Jews left Egypt. And they were traveling toward Mount Sinai. They're arriving at the Red or the Reed Sea, the Yam Suf, in front of them, and suddenly they see the Egyptians pursuing them from behind. Stuck between a rock and a hard place. And remember, Mitzrayim is reflective not just of Egypt of old. Mitzrayim comes from the root Mitzarim. Every boundary, every inhibition, every trauma, every fear, every insecurity, including mental health, including every form or experience that in some way inhibits us and limits us, that's Mitzrayim. So here they are stuck between the Mitzrayim behind them and the water and the sea before them. The Yerushalmi tells us that the Jewish people broke into 4 groups. One said, it was a nice dream to be emancipated and freed, but it's not working. Resignation. We return to Egypt. And we'll be slaves, at least we'll be alive. A second group said, let's go to war. Let's go to war with the Egyptians. Battle. A third group said, let's pray to God. And a fourth group said, let us commit mass suicide. Let us jump into the water. This life is impossible to handle. There you have before you literally all the methods and attempts that people individually and collectively use to try to deal with a trauma, to try to deal with a situation that seems impossible. Moshe Rabbeinu turns to God and says, what should we do? Which of the four is right? And what does Hashem say? One word. I've already told you what to do. Vayiso, move forward. I told you, go to Mount Sinai. And from there, we'll go to the promised land. And Vayiso means we will travel on, and we will ultimately come to the Geula. Nachshon ben Aminadav did exactly that, and the sea parted. The lesson in this is so powerful, because you'd think all those four options, they all seem, each one has its own logic. So what exactly is this Vayiso in our personal lives? The Rambam says that when a catastrophe strikes a community, it would be achzorius, cruel, insensitive, to ignore it as mikra nikris, as it happened. Let's move on. An accident. No, he says it compels every individual who's heard about it, who's witnessed it or experienced it, to go into a soul search and introspection, to look at ourselves and see this as a tremendous lesson, that we need to look, not to point fingers. This is not blame, as was pointed out. This is about sensitivity, identifying and looking. This happened. What does it tell us about ourselves, our children? What are they challenged with? What can we do about it? The response Vayiso is saying, we are not going to engage in battle the rest of our lives with our adversaries. We're not going to resign and give in. Even prayer, God said, you need to do something. Yes, I will help you, but you can't become consumed with prayer and rely on me. I've given you the resources, and you can't commit suicide. You cannot give up. You have strengths that are stronger than you may know. Vayiso means that with my power, I've given you the ability to move forward. This is not in any way, I want to make it clear, a judgment or in any way a critique of someone, unfortunately, that has taken their life. That's not the point I'm making. I'm talking about ourselves, how we're supposed to proceed. We cannot just be overcome by grief. We have to grieve and feel the pain, but forward. There's a beautiful story with Rab Meir of Primashlan, where he was once had to go to a mikveh, to a ritual bath, but it was icy slopes in the midwinter in Russia. And he was able to make it down the mountain, even though it was slippery. And they asked him later, how are you able to do it? You're an older man. And he answered in Yiddish, when you're tied above, you don't fall below. The strength of the Jewish people, the strength of each one of us, at the end of the day, is that we were created by God. And God gave us life, an indispensable life, as we shall talk about in a moment. And God also gave us challenges. And God is with us both in our lives and in our darkness. That's a critical point. When Hashem first appeared to Moshe Rabbeinu, we all know, how did he appear to Moshe Rabbeinu? In a sneh, in a thorn bush, in a lowly, fruitless, arid thorn bush. The Medrash asks, why in a thorn bush? If God is going to make a grand appearance and tell Moshe, I'm choosing you to redeem the Jewish people from Mitzrayim, he should have appeared in a beautiful apple tree or in some other beautiful vegetation. Why in a sneh? Because God anticipated that Moshe, the wise Moshe, would ask God and say, very nice, you appear to us in beauty, but are you with us in our suffering? I'm going to go to the Jewish people and they're going to ask me, is God with us here, or he only appears when things are going well? So God preempted that by saying, I am with you. I don't have answers for you, but I cry with you. I am with you. And the mysteries of life and death you may never understand, but I am with you in every situation. And that has given us the strength. Every Pesach, what do we say? V'hi sha'am delanu. Lavesenu, what? That b'chol dever der emdem aleinu l'chalasenu. Every generation, throughout history, they came to destroy us. And this day is not just the anti-Semites and the forces outside of us. It includes also our own inner demons, our own inner fears, our own inner mental illnesses, or whatever else haunts a human spirit. And yet, God, the faith, the promise, we were tied above. That's what allowed us to forge ahead. And as such, what we have here is really a response. It's not a response, a logical one. It's not explaining anything. It's saying we can look at the darkness and we become stronger through the process. I remember in 1999, you may remember in April 99, there was the Columbine tragedy in Colorado. A few young students, teenagers, went into their high school and they literally, Rahman al-Islam, killed over 12 people, their own colleagues and friends and students. And then they killed themselves. It was a real shock. Because no, they didn't seem to have mental illness. They didn't seem to be disturbed or social misfits or any type of grievances. They did this. I don't think till this day people really figured out what was the reason. But I remember Hashgacha Pratis, I happened to be traveling out of the country. And for speaking engagements, a speaking tour for a week. And the city I came to had a large school there, a Jewish school, like a equivalent of a Ramaz here, a co-ed school. And I remember Friday morning was an optional session where the students came together, I believe 14 to 17 years old, in a big gymnasium. And I addressed them. Over 700 students appeared. It was a large school. And I began by asking them a question. I said, the thing that happened, the tragedy in Columbine, do you think it could happen, God forbid, in this school? I was sure that they were going to say to me, we're a Jewish school, we're a different country, this is not American violence that's affecting us. And almost every student raised their hand saying yes. So I said, can you explain why? Why would anyone do something like that? So interestingly, the students asked the faculty if they could step out. They wanted to speak openly and candidly, didn't want to feel that they're being watched or monitored. And they began to share different thoughts, which were, some of them were childish, I would say, but some of them were extremely insightful. One person, one young woman, 15-year-old looked like, says, I think that we don't really find life sacred. Life is not that valuable. There's 7 billion people on this planet. We're pretty much dispensable, especially if we evolved from bacteria. What significance does our life really have? And then when you watch a few shows on TV or on the internet, you start seeing violence, you start seeing, is life valuable? So it's not that surprising, she says, that people, when life isn't valuable, doesn't mean suddenly anyone's going to go kill another person, obviously. Most of us wouldn't do that. But it's much more a breeding ground because you don't have that absolute conviction that your life absolutely matters. And it was exactly what I wanted to hear. So I dwelled on that point. And the most fundamental principle in all of Judaism is the simple opening statement in Chumash. God creates the human being. And what does he say? Creating the human being, b'tselem Elokim, in the divine image. That means just as the divine is eternal and indispensable, human life is exactly that. I'm creating a human being in my image, charging it with a mission, a calling to transform this world. And essentially, every life has something to contribute that no other human being can contribute. I remember hearing this many times from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I had the privilege to listen and also write down and publish his talks. I remember once he looked around at a Farbrengen and he said, every one of us, every one of you, every person on earth has a mission to accomplish that you and only you can accomplish. Even Moshe Rabbeinu cannot accomplish what you have to accomplish, because why would Hashem have to send two of the same? How powerful is that statement? Think about it. It essentially means that if your life is not absolutely meaningful and indispensable, then all your choices are also negligible, are also arbitrary and optional. But when you know that statement that your life given to you by God is basically, to use a quote I use often, birth is God saying you matter now and forever. Your actions matter, your behavior matters. What you have to accomplish, no one else can do but you. It takes a whole different take. It gives us a whole different take on life and its value and its sanctity. At the same time, let's be honest, we have to acknowledge that the demons, that darkness that can consume a soul, to the point that a person would go ahead and do the thing that most defies the natural instinct of all of us, which is survival. That means the darkness in some ways overwhelmed that great gift called life. We are not afraid to look at that. And we have obviously have the empathy and the compassion, no, absolutely no judgment. We don't know what people go through. We cry. We cry with the family, we cry with the community, we cry with that person. The mysterious ways of what people go through in life, we will never know. But we're with them. We're always with them. And we recognize that imay anoichi b'tzara. The Kabbalists and the mystics, the Hasidic masters, put it this way, that God, just as God created light, he also created darkness. You say it every night. He formed light, he shaped light, and he created darkness. Darkness is not a man-made creation, it's God's creation. As a matter of fact, until the Hashem said, Vayihi Oyer, the world was covered in darkness. Whose darkness was that? That was God's darkness. So the mystics explained this darkness is called the Great Tzimtzum. That God in his mysterious ways, in order to allow for existence to be, for us to have independent consciousness, chose to conceal his divine consciousness, which allows room for us. So that is a beautiful concept because that creates a relationship. Now there's existence. There's a human being. There's a Jew who comes into this world, a neshama, to fulfill a mission. But there's always another side to the coin. And that is that darkness, when it's misunderstood and not understood as a means to a deeper end, can become the demons and the darknesses that infect and affect human beings. So even mental illness and even other traumas, whether they're due to clinical or due to human experiences, nurture or nature, are all rooted in this great symptom. Can we blame God? In a way, we don't blame God, obviously, but ultimately, if God had not had created that concealment, there wouldn't have been any issues altogether, but then there wouldn't have been life either. As Hashem told Job, the great sufferer, he said, you asked me why the righteous suffer. Why do bad things happen to good people? Were you there when I created heaven and earth? You asked me why there's death. You ask me why there's life. You ask me why there's pain. You ask me why there's joy. The fact is, we ask the questions when things are not going well. And we have the right to ask. God is not afraid of our questions. But we have to understand that we're entering into a so-called realm of something that is beyond light and darkness. And therefore, when we see darkness, we're humbled, we cry, we're overwhelmed, but we know it will not destroy us, and we will forge ahead. And whatever that neshama had to go through, the Yisurim, we will never understand. But you know what? The neshama lives on. That neshama as well. So that's not a consolation, obviously. We would all love that all of us have long, healthy lives, and we go right into Mashiach and to Tchias HaMesim. But we face the darkness, and we're not afraid of it. We realize that within it, we can find deeper strengths. And when you're tied above, you don't fall below. You know, I think one of the challenges that all of us face when things like this happen is our comfort zones are shaken up. My own experiences in dealing with these type of issues, I find sometimes, and it was mentioned by the previous speakers, that people go into a judgmental state or dismissal or denial, all the four different options I mentioned before. And I don't want to blame them because I think people cannot fathom something. They don't want to necessarily deal with it. So the easiest thing is to dismiss and say, oh, that person was something wrong with them. The parents were no good. The community did something wrong. The finger pointing begins. Healthy people, as I said from the Rambam, go into a state of introspection. Look at yourself. Look at yourself. Try to fix something. Try to become a better person. It's easy just to dismiss someone did something and say, you know what, that person's crazy. Or some other expression like that. People don't want to be challenged. We want things to be fit into a certain box and like it going well. And if it's not going that well, we begin to sweep it under the carpet. It's not my problem, it's someone else's problem, as was so well articulated, especially that little clip that you showed. Empathy, yes, empathy. It reminds me of the story with the Mittler Rebbe, where people were coming into Yechidus, the private audience, to see him. There was a long line of people. And one individual was by the Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe, he stepped out. The Mittler Rebbe asked his gabbai, his assistant, stop the Yechidus, stop the line, which was uncharacteristic of him, to keep people waiting that came and traveled to see him. And from behind the door, the gabbai and others heard the Rebbe crying, terribly crying. No one understood what happened. Then after a while, the Rebbe opened the door and resumed. Later, he explained to the gabbai, he said, when someone comes to me with a problem, I don't give them advice. I look at my own heart to see in some subtle form, where's the problem within me? And the only way I can advise them is when I repair something and remedy it within myself. You talk about bedside manner, empathy. A Rebbe, you could say the Rebbe is a tzaddik. He does. How could you compare him to the individuals coming to see him? But no, there's no such thing. Something happened and you heard about it and you're being asked for advice. It means it's about you too. You're one with a person. And it's not just that you can give better advice because you found it within yourself. You also become two people. You become two as one, and that strengthens each other. What is Nicham Avelim at the end of the day? What power can mortals like us have to comfort another person when we ourselves need comfort? Because Hashem said, I'm giving you the strength of Nachamu, Nachamu Ami. You're human beings. I'm giving you divine strength that you can comfort and console another person, not because you have answers. Just be there, hold their hand, cry with them. We're in it together because this great symptom affects us all. Just because one family is suffering right now doesn't mean that all of us are not within a state of darkness. It just means, thank God, that we may not be impacted by it immediately, but we're all part of reality where there's this big symptom, this big dark void in existence. But there's also the light, the deeper light that we access and we find when we hold on to that which is above, Vayuso. There's something about that. And this isn't just theories. Look at look at our history. Look at the Jewish people's history. Look at our trajectory, our journey. Been through the darkest of the dark. And we came out stronger. Here we are. No one understands this mystery. It's because we had that amunah, the betachin. We held on to something. Holocaust survivors. I remember hearing once from Eli Wiesel, who was a good friend of my father's. After my father passed away, I became friendly with him. And I asked him, as I asked other Holocaust survivors, I said, tell me, is it true that when the Jews marched to the gas chambers, they sang Ani Mamin, I believe in complete faith, with complete faith in the coming of Mashiach, of the Messiah? He says, well, we were in the barracks. They didn't let us be close to that, even though we knew what was happening. But I can tell you, on a daily and nightly basis, of course, that nigun, that song, other songs, Shema Yisrael, Kaddish, constantly. So I said, look, I'm just an American spoiled kid. Can you explain to me? It sounds like insane, if I may ask. The darkest moment in history. In every way, you could say, Haster Aster Ponai. God concealed himself, a double concealment, allowing 1.5 million innocent children to perish like that. The inhumanity. The Jews had all the right to be angry at God. And here they're singing his praises. Yiskadel v'yiskadel shmei Rabba, ani mamin. It sounds like complete dissonance, like they're out of touch. And I said it, of course, in a respectful way. And I remember his response, and I remember the response of others very similar. Well, obviously, the first so-called gallows humor he said was, well, it's true, the Jews are insane. We know that. That's a given. But on a serious note, he said, you have to remember, the declaration of Animamin and Yin Kaddish and Shema and so on was not denial, was not escapism. It was the greatest declaration and statement possible. That is Am Yisrael Chai. They were declaring and saying, you can take our bodies, but you can't take our souls. You can take our lives, but you can't take our beliefs. And if it won't be us, it will be our children. And if it won't be our children, it will be our grandchildren. We will prevail. We will not go down just because we are now being victimized like this. We are suffering, but we're not sufferers. We have a greater reality, a greater truth, a higher force. Now, obviously, we don't want to be in this place, but we're here. We will not go down in a whimper. We will declare that we will live on, and ultimately, the nation of Israel, Am Yisrael, will continue until Mashiach comes. Ani Mamin. Imagine that type of sentiment. Do you need a better formula for healing, for catharsis, for growth than that? Obviously, we don't want all of this, but this is the tzimtzum, unfortunately, at work. So we look at the abyss, we see it, does not terrify us, though it's unwanted, and we look for God everywhere. God is with us, even though we may not understand the mystery. And there's great strength when we know that there's someone with us, because one of the things you hear constantly from people who are suffering, depression, mental illness, whether it's abuse, other traumas, and so on, is the tremendous loneliness, the loneliness. I'm alone. No one will understand how much I suffer. I don't want anyone here because I don't want to cause other people pain. So that empathy that we discussed throughout this evening, knowing that I'm with you. We're not saying that's a guarantee is going to solve all our problems, but it's the way that we build strength. Imagine, and I say this on a practical note, that every morning, and maybe this should be a resolution we take away from this tragedy and from all tragedies, and it should never happen again, that perhaps every morning, as parents, as educators, as we say Moida Ani with our children, not just say the words and not just say, I love you. You are God's gift in this world. I am so honored and blessed that God sent your neshama to me, to us, to your parents, to be your caretakers, to be your gardeners. You have an indispensable role to play. And whatever will happen, I am always going to be here for you, to be with you, to cultivate, to nurture, to validate. Again, I'm not suggesting this will overcome all forms of darkness, but it's definitely an additional asset. It gives us more fighting chance. Today, more than ever, we can't take this for granted. People do not see necessarily life as indispensable. And when the pain is too strong, people will resign and will give in. No judgment, no stigma. It's how it is. But what the more we can do in infusing that type of confidence in your life, how could that not have an impact? If a child heard that every day of their lives from the moment they're born, every day and every evening, it has to have impact. Conversations can be spawned through that. What does this mean? What is my mission? What is my calling? And who knows? When a person has that somewhere embedded inside them, that sense that perhaps when they will face a challenge, they remember, 1 second, I still have something to give. So again, I want to make it clear, it's not a magic pill, but it's the Torah way of how we infuse ourselves and our families and our friends and our children with Vayiso. You're given a mission, march forward. Do not allow yourself to see yourself as a victim, resignation, one form of escape, another form of escape. You have the strengths to forge ahead because God is walking with you and is within you. Even in your sneh, even in your thorn bush, even in the darkest moments. You may not see it, but there's a force there and it was created by God in some way. So I want to conclude my remarks with your permission, which just is coming from my heart, to be honest. You know, the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya Shulchan Aruch said that when you have a question and when you're asked a question, you don't have an answer, you tell a story. And he said, if that doesn't work, you sing a song. I find for myself and for many others that a nigun, especially a nigun that comes from a holy place, has a tremendous power because it transcends intellect. A song is not about a logical, philosophical, theological answer to a question. It just touches us and resonates within us in a profound way. So there's a nigun I'd like to sing. And if you like, you can sing along wherever you are, which is a nigun that the Lubavitcher Rebbe taught Simchas Torah night in the wee hours of the morning in 1958. The nigun is called Shamil. And it's made up of 3 stanzas, 3 sections. And I can't see anything more fitting. It's a nigun that captures the soul's journey, as the Rebbe explained then. The first section of the nigun, it talks about the nostalgia, the memories of a soul when it was free in heaven before it came down to this dark, corrupt, and hostile world. The second part of the nigun is the melancholy, the sadness of a soul that has to go through challenges of all sorts, and sometimes even the darkest ones that we're discussing this evening. And the third part of the nigun is the hope, the optimism, the absolute conviction that we will be free once again and soar again. There's a story behind it as well, but let me just go to the nigun. And the nigun to me is a song taught by a Rebbe. And I have no doubt that it was taught also with the intention to give us the strength. And maybe we chant this song at times like this, where we both remember the journey. It began beautiful. It sometimes gets very dark, but there will be a light that will come at the end of the story. And the nigun captures all these 3. So when you sing it, you actually can feel the journey of the soul. And remember, the journey is not one step. It's all 3. But the end is obviously, the conclusion is the Geula and Mashiach. So this is the nigun Shamil. That's the nostalgia. oh, yanai, oh, you know, yanai, oh, yanai, oh, yanai, you know, the darkness. You know, the hope. Thank you very much for giving me the humble honor to share some of these thoughts. We are in it together. Hashem is here with us, even in the darkest moments. And we become stronger through it all. May we all be blessed that we don't have to go through any such darkness ever again. Any one of us in this community, in any community all over the world. And after everything we've gone through for thousands of years, the time has already come to have the complete and permanent light, permanent Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, with no more destruction ever again, no more pain, no more trauma, no more loss. And in some strange way, Oitcha Hashem Ke'anaftabi, we will discover the great, great light that comes even from the darkest moments. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for tuning in tonight with us. I want to thank once again, the panelists, Rebecca Zeitlin from the Didi Hirsch Mental Health Services, Rabbi Dr. Fox from Chai Lifeline, Rabbi Simon Jacobson from the Meaningful Life Center. Rabbi Simon Jacobson, those words were very, very touching, very meaningful. Thank you for bearing your soul to us tonight. And like you said, and like each one of us have expressed, we hope that going forward, we should only meet in person and virtually for happy events to discuss happy things, and we should all be there for each other. Once again, the video will be available, so be sure to share it and watch this again. Thank you very much.